here we are again, still alive, one day closer to death, making the most of each moment, sowing really good seeds, delicious seeds that'll ripen as marvellous things, more good human bodies with good health, good conditions, a clear mind, access to teachers, good friends, support, all these things, all the conditions that we do have now that we must have worked unbelievably hard to get. They're not accidental, they're not gifts from somebody else. They're the fruit of our hard work. So you know, if we realise what we've got now is the fruit of that, then it's logical that we must do the same to get more of the same. At the very least, more of the same. At the very least. So for this reason, we're sitting here thinking about the Buddha's views of the universe, Buddha's reality, Buddha's view of reality, his observation of reality, and the most skillful way to live life. So that we can achieve this natural potential that he has identified as the natural potential of all beings to be fully developed in goodness and totally rid of the rubbish. Sangye charang soke chognam la jangcho badu dagni kyab suchi dagi chönyen gipe sonam ki drola penche sangye dropa shog sangye charang soke chognam la jangcho badu dagni kyab suchi dagi chönyen gipe sonam ki drola penche sangye dropa shog sangye charang soke chognam la jangcho badu dagni kyab suchi dagi chönyen gipe sonam ki drola penche sangye dropa shog. Okay. So we talked a bit yesterday about the death process, how to prepare, how to live our life in the context of impermanence, so that readies us for death. Just getting used to the idea that death is part of life, and more as a Buddhist, if you take the view that this is just one little blip in the ocean, there's not so much attachment to this one little package. We've come from the past and we'll continue to the future. So we see it in that way. We see ourselves as the fruit of our past, and we'll cause the future. It's a very different view, not so frantic, more long term. So the first level, as we're talking, is given that we don't want suffering and do want happiness, then the very least we do is practice junior school and abide by the laws of karma. So you can guarantee that when you die, you get another decent human rebirth, more of the same. So the way to think of this, one way to think of this is, we understand the idea of resources. If you've got a resource, it's something you use to get something. It's a very dynamic concept, So we think of money. It's such a dumb example, but it really works. You think of money. So look at what it is intrinsically. It's this oblong piece of paper or plastic, depending on the country you live in. And actually, I read research somewhere, I think in America, the dollar notes are so repulsive, so disgusting. Cocaine and caca and heroin and unbelievable disgusting things on money. So in itself, it's a piece of dirty paper, Intrinsically, what you look at is a piece of dirty paper, really dirty. And you would not normally pick up a piece of dirty paper. You see it and you think it was disgusting. But we even see one of those pieces of paper with a number 1 in the corner, we get excited. So what we understand is, and this is a really good example, simple but such a good example, that when we see money, we understand the meaning of it. If you look at it, you don't know what it means. It's a dirty piece of paper with green ink on it and these funny looking faces, and it's dirty. You wouldn't bother picking it up. But when you know the meaning of it, and that means it's proving emptiness, we give it that meaning. We all buy into the meaning that it's a resource and you can get $1 worth of something with it. We get that, and it's a very powerful concept for us. It's very powerful, immediate. But intrinsically, what it is in its nature is absolutely zero. It's a dirty piece of paper. So this is the analogy here. This body is a walking sewer. It's not being horrible. It's not being sarcastic. It's a reality. It's a walking sewer, this bag of bones of ours that, in its nature is just stuff. It's got nothing. It's nothing in its nature. Intrinsically, it's nothing. It's just caca, But when we understand the meaning of it, using Buddha's view, the meaning of it, what it is, it's this extraordinary resource. And it's the result of unbelievable hard work. So look at $1. Even $1 you wouldn't want to waste because you know how much you work just to get the $1. So you know its value, which you give it. So when we understand our life in that sense, as a resource, the fruit of past work, even though in its nature it's nothing, but we know it's the result of, in a Buddhist view, of hard work, past virtue, to have this human body which is imbued with a human consciousness. So it's like a miracle. Therefore, logically, who would want to waste it? But you've got to think of it this way. We don't think of it like that. We think I'm this big bag of bones, someone else made me, I didn't ask to get born, and people are mean to me, and it's ugly, I'm fat, I'm ugly, no one loves me. We walk around like this, we've got a $1,000 note and think it's, don't like it because it's dirty. I mean, we're pathetic, But that's the view of ego. We're nothing. That's why we kill ourselves. We're nothing. So that from the Buddhist point of view, we have no understanding of what we are. We have no understanding of the fruit of virtue, fruit of hard work, of morality. And Lama Zopa says, no way in the world that what we've got in this life that we have in our resources, that it has to have been the result of not just working in a spiritual practice, but living in vows of morality. So we really did understand how much we put together to get what we've got. Just like we know, even you see $100, you know how much you work to get that 100. You just know it immediately. You see it and you know it because you've given it that meaning. So therefore, the conclusion, you wouldn't waste it. That's the logic here. It's very simple logic. But of course, like as always, you've got to buy into this meaning. This is Buddha's view. It's not the materialist view. It's not Christian view. Christian view, you're a gift from God. It's up to what you think. It's up to you, The Buddha's view is it's the result of virtue, the result of morality, the result of goodness, the result of hard work. So the conclusion, how tragic to waste it. It's a really simple concept. So obviously, what's the question? How do you, what would you do? What do you do with this resource? What is this resource for? Well, this is the way they describe in the Lam Rim. The very minimum you do with it is you get your 100% return on your $100. You get $100 worth. Good enough. You'd be sad even if you got $99 worth. You'd feel like a loss. So to at least get your $100 worth, that's practicing junior school. Given that what this life is the fruit of past virtue, past work, then you do it exactly the same again with this human body. When you die, you get exactly the same result. Another decent human body with access to spiritual path, access to things, access to, you can even do more. Practice more generosity, you're going to end up being born into a family where you don't have to work. That's an incredible resource. And plus the wish to practice Dharma, the wish to practice the spiritual path, then you'll use those resources to help you do that. That's the perfect solution, a perfect scenario to be born into. How fortunate. How fortunate, So if someone left you money when they died, or if your parents have given you money, don't feel guilty. Don't think, oh, aren't I lucky? No, you're not lucky. It's the fruit of your generosity. So don't waste it. Use it to use this life to get at least another human rebirth when you die. Minimum way to use your $100. Get $100, worth. But you can do more with this resource. This mind, this body, these resources, this life, this leisure, this intelligence. You can go to high school. You can get to the root of the problem and uproot all the delusions. And you can get the hell out of the mess and stop getting reborn in bags of bones and walking sewers. You can do that with this resource. But you can do even more. You can go to university and you can become a Buddha. You can become a Bodhisattva and then become a Buddha and enter into Vajrayana postgraduate and do it quickly so you can be of benefit to all sentient beings. That's what you can do with this resource. So it's a precious resource. Don't waste it. That's the conclusion. That's the action point. Don't waste it. So what does don't waste it again mean? So what's wasting it look like? Well, think of it. Anything less than being virtuous. Anything less than not harming, not killing, not lying, not stealing. Anything less than that is pissing this resource down the toilet, to be blunt about it. So what a tragedy. It's like having $100 and you use it to wipe your bottom. How stupid. So using your life to do anything less than not kill, not lie, not steal, not to mention, helping others, to do anything less than that is like using money for toilet paper. How ridiculous. What a waste. What a tragedy. It's just a way to think, that's all. We're a resource. So it gets us less personal. I'm poor big fat self-pity me, plodding through life, trying to get happy, waiting for people to make me happy, No. Grow up. Be joyful that you've got this opportunity, this marvellous resources that you created. So pull our finger out, as we say in Australia. It's a strange saying, isn't it? Where is everybody? The place is empty. No, we're all here, are we? Are we all here? Oh, that's just because it's shade, isn't it? We're not in the shade, that's right. Anyway, not waste this resource. Not waste it. At least do the same It's what we must have done to get this, to do more, so we can, when we die, we could die tomorrow, so we can, you know, happily get another one of the same. That's the idea. That's the way they say it. So we talked about death. First how to live our life in the context of death, and then the actual death process. We went through that fairly briefly. So in terms of helping others to die, let's talk about that, which is the subject of Lama Zopa's book. The key point about which all this advice exists is the fact that the next rebirth is determined at the period of the death process, which is before you know, not long before you stop breathing, maybe a couple of hours. That's the central time. That's the thing to know. That's then that the karmic seeds, among the millions of karmic seeds in our bank vaults, the karmic seed that will be triggered, that will be the one that will determine our next life. It occurs right then. So knowing that, everything we do to help our loved ones die, or your animal, is to ensure that that time, at that period, they're peaceful. And if they're peaceful, their mind is virtuous. And when the mind is peaceful and virtuous, that when the grasping does arise as you start the death process, that will trigger a virtuous karmic seed, which will determine a future rebirth, a good future rebirth. That's it. It's a technical point, you know, not something holy. It's technical. That's the key point. And all the information is around that. So that beforehand, for the, you know, in Lama Zopa's book, like parts 3, 4, and 5 are all the, or 2, 3, and 4, or whatever, I forget now. 3, 4, and 5 are all the information. The first one is what to do in the weeks and months and weeks before death. So the first thing there is to make a conducive environment. One of the most important things to help your loved one, if they're going to be, you know, old or sick or dying slowly, you give them a really conducive environment. And this is an interesting point, you know. If we look at sick rooms or hospital rooms, they're ugly. They're full of machines and noises and blips and things, and they're ugly because we think it doesn't matter. But somehow if you're living in that bed all the time and you're still half conscious, and even though you're in and out of consciousness, everything you see and hear will have an effect on you. So, you know, a dark room with curtains and things and other people's noise and doors banging, and it's beyond a distressing way to be sick and to die. It's the worst way to die. You could argue, even though nurses are so kind and hospitals are so good, it's about the worst place to die, unless you have your own private room and you have enough money for that. Then you make the place beautiful. And that means everything in that room should be for the benefit of the dying person. That means whatever they see and hear and touch should be for their benefit. So in this section, Rinpoche has a series of chapters on the different practices to do. So there are practices, things you can see, things you can hear, things you can touch. Because everything in the Buddhist view about the mind, as we've discussed, everything we see, hear, touch, taste, smell leaves imprints in the mind and has an effect on us. And we know that. So to die in a place that's beautiful, have the room beautiful, everything is beautiful. So when they open their eyes, it's peaceful for their mind. It subdues their mind, you know. We have senses. We must use them appropriately. So when our friend Trisha, a nun, Trisha, an English nun, same age as me, you know, we used to joke about being the same age and being born the year of the monkey, me and Donna, but we're still alive, but she died. All of a sudden, there she was having a break. She ran Root Institute in Bodh Gaya. She'd been in India for like 60 years, you know. So she went to Australia to see some friends, and she was sick, and she went to the hospital, and she said, oh, you'll be dead in a couple of months, got this virulent cancer, you know. So she contacted Lama Zopa. He said, yeah, okay, you might as well stay in Australia and die there. No point in trying to get better. He could see that. So she chose a place to die. Well, I mean, it's near Chenrezig Institute, which is up in the bush in Queensland, but next to it is this gorgeous place that some private person bought and made, and it's like a Pure Land. It's just utterly beautiful, with the most incredible views, the most lovely rooms, and peaceful. So she chose to stay there. So when you open your eyes, you look into space and the sky, you know, it's just so beautiful. It helps the mind be peaceful. We know the effect of the sensory objects on us. You know, you don't criticize that, but you use it. So to have a beautiful room is conducive for the person to be peaceful and happy. Every time they open their eyes, seeing flowers, smelling nice things, or seeing images, especially of their guru, their Buddha. So one of my friends in Missoula, in Montana, she's always lying down. She's dying. So she has pictures of Lama Zopa and all her lamas across the roof, you know, across the ceiling, like a bar, you know. So every time you open her eyes, she sees them, leaves the imprint. You see the pictures of the Buddhas. You hear the sound of mantras. You hear the sound of the teachings. You hear the sound of your teacher's voice. This is an unbelievably precious way to help a person. You know, we're talking about a Buddhist here. But if they're a Christian, then you adjust it to them. You know, you have Jesus there, or whoever they like. You let them hear prayers to help the mind be peaceful and therefore virtuous, and therefore happy. Therefore happy, and that is what triggers virtuous seeds. It's a practical issue, not some holy thing. You know. So to make the room beautiful, conducive. And of course, even when they're unconscious, we think, oh, they're unconscious, they can't hear anything. It's absolutely not true. Especially when you're sick and when you're dying, your mind's much more sensitive. So you can be aware at a subtle level very easily. It's very common. It's not uncommon at all. And I mean, I gave that example just me, and I'm thick as the post, you know. I'm not a meditator. In my retreat, asleep, in dreams, my subtle consciousness was vivid dreams, but I was crystal clear, hearing all the sounds all around. That's very easily the case with sick people and dying people. So you treat the room like a shrine room. The only sounds, as Rinpoche says, should be virtuous sounds or useful sounds, voices that are pleasant and kind. He doesn't say it like that, but it's like that. So you keep all the troublemakers out. You keep all the people that they're attached to out. You keep their pets out. This is very shocking for us, because in our culture we conflate attachment and love, you know. But it's the worst thing possible, especially having your pets, where people are so obsessively attached to their ridiculous pets. I'm sorry, that's rude. I don't mean it like that. We should love animals, but not have attachment, you know. I mean, everybody who's got a pet thinks they're Buddha. I mean, I've met a Buddhist who doesn't think their pet's a Buddha, you know, because they like to sit with them when they meditate. Of course they do. It's a nice feeling. They feel safe and comfy. Doesn't mean they're a bodhisattva. Anyway, I'm being silly now. Excuse me. So keep the pets out, because there's so much attachment. And when you die with attachment, it's about the worst way to die. You go straight to the animal realm, you know. You're creating the cause. So you really have, and this is assuming, of course, you're in charge. If you're just like the second cousin and you come in once a day to see grandma, then you have no control. You can't do anything. But if you're the ones in charge, you really have to know what you're doing. As Lama Zopa says, this is education we all need to have. Yeah, there's the medical information. We have to have that, but this is the mind. So treat the place so holy, you know, peaceful, quiet, whatever's there should be helpful for the person. The sound should be peaceful, especially as they're getting older, sicker and more unconscious and more like even in a coma. Absolutely peaceful, quiet. Prayers all the time, prayers on. There's so many people, so many stories and examples of when you're unconscious and how you're aware of things. I always use this to tell the story of one of my friends in Sydney who went into a deep coma. She was in the ICU in some hospital in Sydney, way up on the coast, if anybody knows Sydney. And I was living in the centre in Ashfield. It was like 50 kilometres away. So anyway, the husband, she's not a Buddhist. She knew Sakya Trinzen. She'd know her family. She'd know his family. And she'd know Songsar Khyentse Rinpoche. He was living in her house in Sydney for ages in the 80s. So she's close to these lamas, but not really a Buddhist, but had lots of Buddhist things. So she was in this deep coma. They weren't sure that she would even come out of it. So anyway, the husband asked permission for me to go into her, and I figured the night would be best. First, because you can drive fast at night time, there's no traffic, especially through Fenchurch Forest. You can go 100 kilometres an hour. It's because they're quite strict in Australia. You get tickets all the time with the cameras. You never meet a policeman. So anyway, I'd go there every night and see her. And actually, the husband rang up and said, "Can I come in at night? I'm her pastor or something, you know." Like, and that I was Buddhist. And they got nervous when I arrived. They said, "Please don't ring any bells." I promised I wouldn't ring any bells. So anyway, I go every night for about 40, 50 minutes and just stand next to her bed, you know. So all these things plugged in, totally unconscious. And I just say prayers quietly in her ear. And before that, I'd asked the students of these two lamas to get them to pray for her. So every now and again, I'd say, "Judy, Songsar Khyentse Rinpoche is praying for you. Judy, His Holiness Sakya Trinzen is praying for you." Every now and again in her ear. Well, she came out of a coma eventually, all perky and fine. She said she remembered nothing except this husky voice, she said. She didn't know it was me. She didn't know it was me. She thought it was a blue lady coming through the window, she said, saying, "Judy, Songsar Khyentse Rinpoche is praying for you. Judy, His Holiness Sakya Trinzen is praying." Exactly those words. That's the only thing that went in her head. That, for me, how can you deny something about that? How can she make that up? You know, that's powerful. So many times. I remember one time our friend, you know, the Professor Jeffrey Hopkins, one of these American professors, who was the first one really to be a Buddhist practitioner, who was a professor who started Asian studies. It was in Virginia in '76. And he told me, you know, there's two things there, never mind. But he got Lyme's disease, which caused him to go into the deepest of comas. And sometimes people never get out of it, you know. And they weren't sure he would. But he said he was in this deep coma, and the only thing he could find in his mind was, I think it was Manjushri's mantra that Ling Rinpoche had given him. I think it was Manjushri's. And he said, "Never forget this mantra." I think it was that one. The only one he could find in his mind, you know. The mantra of wisdom. You hear things like this. Christian stories too, you know, which for me just reinforces that somehow there are beings that do exist that we can't see with our eyes. And this, for me, I can have some confidence from stories, you know. So here we're talking the Buddha's way of seeing it. So the conducive environment is really important first. As Rinpoche says in the book, he says, if you really realise the importance of the role of helpers, your way of being with your dying person can make the difference between whether they die with peace or die with freak out and go to a lower realm or get a decent human birth. So it's so important. And why? Because most people don't prepare for death. We don't think about it. We don't want to know about it. Even Buddhists, we don't want to know about death. We just happily live in denial. We can't stand it. So we don't prepare. We don't live in the context of death. Most people never think about it. It was interesting, one of our friends, Lenny, you know Lenny? You met Lenny? Cronish. She worked for years and years, a long time ago, 70s and 80s, in the hospice movement. She was a nurse. And she said even then it was just a given among all her friends and colleagues that most people die with fear. Stressful, clinging to the sheets and anxious and turning and tossing. Their mind's so distressed, so distressed. But she said that what she always noticed was anybody with a spiritual practice didn't die unhappily. And that's not because religion's so holy. I think it's simply because they had a viewpoint. They had a view of what was going to happen. They had a view. Because I think that when you have fear, when you don't know, you have a view. I think it's really logical. Like if a person is very sick and it's your friend, you're going to freak out because you have no medical knowledge. But if you have medical knowledge, you have compassion for them, but you've got knowledge, you won't freak out. You just get in there and do something to help them. So this is wisdom. Wisdom is knowing what to do to help. So compassion is not enough, So helping a person, navigating this process, they could be Christian, they could be communist, I don't care what they are. An animal, a baby, the same. Same scenario. You make it conducive, peaceful. Do anything to help their mind be peaceful. When it's peaceful, it's virtuous. When it's virtuous, when the breath process starts, that triggers a virtuous karmic seed. It's a logical process. This is the way they describe, That's the point. And when they stop breathing, then the work starts, continues, another 3 days. You keep the place so pure, so clear, have prayers and practices, done all these kinds of things. This is the Buddhist approach, Their mind's sitting in their body there. It could be for 3 days. And again, they could be vividly conscious. They could be having those so-called out-of-body experiences. You don't technically leave your body, but because your subtle mind is more capable and it doesn't need a brain and a body, it therefore has the experience of being out of your body. But you're still in your body, otherwise you'd be dead. But your mind can go wherever you want because it's not confined by space or time or matter. That's the capacity of the subtle consciousness. People, what we call astral traveling. That's completely what our mind is capable of. I remember one fellow in Tushita in Dharamsala 30 years ago, Brazilian, lived in Australia. He had this capacity when he went to sleep to travel all over the world. He'd go visit his girlfriend in Melbourne, he'd go to Africa, he'd come to the teachings in the morning exhausted, just travel around the world all night, So of course he thought he was a holy being. He was so bored by the idea that he'd got to give up attachment and anger. That was too boring for him. He just felt he was enlightened. So clearly he'd done some kind of meditation in a past life, but he had no idea what to do with this. He just became nuts probably, That's what happens. So the mind can do that. It can have experiences of things beyond you. That's what clairvoyance is. And you get clairvoyance when you get single point of concentration. And then you increase it and increase it and increase it as you grow spiritually. Buddha says if you want to really help people, you've got to have clairvoyance. There's a story about Lama Yeshe. I don't know if I told you this story. I always tell this story. It's involving Harry. I mentioned Harry. Yep. I mentioned the story of falling off the mountain. Yep. Yeah, okay, well, the same Harry. He was at Kopan when Lama Yeshe was still alive, and it would have been in the early 80s. And there was one of the monks there was very sick, one of the Sherpas. And he'd found a doctor to help him. And he mentioned to Lama, and Harry's, Lama's disciple. So Lama just said, he doesn't need a doctor, leave it, it's okay. So he trusted Lama. Then the monk got sicker and sicker, went up to the mountains to his family and died. Well, it sounds like Lama Yeshe is very cruel, doesn't it? But Lama Lunda explained, the abbot, he explained, because of Lama's clairvoyance, which is no big deal, we've all had clairvoyance many lifetimes, because of his clairvoyance and his compassion and his wisdom, he could see clearly the karma this boy had created that caused this suffering. If he'd gotten better this life, he would have been fine, but he wouldn't have finished that heavy karma and his next life much worse. So by dying, he purified all the karma and he died very peacefully, a very good death. By dying and being sick, he finished the karma completely, next life fantastic. Now who's got that kind of wisdom? Our default impulse is just to make it perfect now at all costs, Which is why we can't stand death. Death for us is like a dirty word, just got to keep alive, Doesn't always follow. Doesn't mean you let a person die out of not caring, but that level of wisdom, that's pretty profound. So of course we use what wisdom we've got. So in the case of Lama Zopa, and Trisha, he could tell immediately there's no point in trying to get better. So he said, stay there, die there, you'll be fine. Which sort of sounds shocking in the West, You're having a mental breakdown, going to 47 doctors, you know, having insurance, freaking out, trying to get better, crying, panic-stricken. She accepted, she died, you know. She died up there. Apparently, Yeshikado and Ailsa helped her, our two friends, our nuns, and she, at the last moment, she decided she wanted to go to this hospice, so she left the place where she was and hopped into the car. She was perfectly fine and went to this hospice place, and then there was a person sitting with her, one of the Buddhists, and then like 2 days later she died. She said she suddenly sat up, talked in this foreign language, very bossy. She was a very bossy person, and she ran in this centre in India, so it's like a memsahib, you know, so probably in Hindi, and then she died right there. Right after that, shouting at somebody in Hindi, then she just went and died like that. Boom, died. And then interestingly, Lama Zopa told Yeshikado, he checked up, and it was best to leave her body for 10 days and then have it not cremate for 10 days. So they stuck her in the fridge for 10 days, which is something we'll get to. So anyway, make an environment conducive. Keep the troublemakers out. Keep the people they're very attached to out. Don't be like a policeman, you know. Like one time, I heard about one Hindu husband. His poor wife is dying, so weak, she's sleeping half the time. And he wakes her up 6 times a day to do her prayers. I mean, just leave the poor woman alone, please. You know, he can do the damn prayers, you know. But he kind of forced her to wake up and sit up and do her prayers. I mean, that's horrible. Give it a break, you know. You do the prayers for her, let her sleep. Be gentle and kind, you know. So then, so then of course you've got to become familiar with this eight stages of death. It's not very easy to do that. And get to have a sense. And I know in the medical profession, people who are around dying people, many people like nurses tell me, you know, when a person's dying, certain signs occur, you know, which is very helpful to understand. So when you know what's happening, then you really make it just so perfect. And through that 8 stages, that's when it's so important, the first 4 stages. As I said, about to the 2nd and 3rd stage, that's when the grasping kicks in, really powerful, and that's when the fear can be terrible. But if you're helping them navigate and there's prayers on, then that grasping, if they're virtuous, will trigger. That's the trigger that triggers the karmic seed. And in our case, we can deduce it was a virtuous karmic seed. Before we even stopped breathing, this life was already programmed. Our tendencies, our experiences, the whole deal of this life, from our karmic seeds, nothing to do with our parents. When we come to them and we're born to them, then how they treat us, of course, is part of how we grow up. But the crucial point the Buddha's making is, we're not created by them. We're not made by them. Anger is not given to us by them. Being good at music is not given to us by them. That's the materialist view, and that's the crucial difference from the Buddhist one. Of course family makes a difference. Of course how they treat you makes a difference. But the seeds of whatever you have are in your mind and coming from your past. And the fact that you have those parents who are beautiful or ugly, that's even your karma as well. It's a very different view. So in our case, virtuous karmic seed must have been triggered. And then they say, you know, as you're dying, even the way the heat leaves your body can be an indication of what karma has been triggered. And the way you behave as you're dying. And I've been told a couple of stories of the Steve Jobs one. This friend of ours in Australia fell off the roof at Vajrapani in California, died blissfully in his wife's arms. You know, that indicates a virtuous karmic seed had been triggered. So that as their mind's getting more subtle, because they're moving to a happy rebirth, the mind is more blissful. If you're moving towards an unhappy rebirth, it can be a horrifying way to die. You know, you're freaking out, you scream. It's the most tortured way to die. It's an indication of the future rebirth is not a good one. That's how they talk. So when you stop breathing, your gross consciousness has ceased, and now your subtle consciousness goes through this process. It could take 3 days, or it could take a minute. Depends on the person, you know. One of our friends, Alison, who died in San Francisco, she had this very suffering life, lot of suffering. And she had an accident and seemingly wasn't so bad, but suddenly her whole body collapsed. She's only like 30-something. And she's in the hospital, and her parents decided to pull the plug on her. So they were waiting, while she was unconscious, they were waiting to pull the plug until our geshe came from our centre. But before that happened, her lungs exploded. So this, you know, and a shock to her poor little body and her poor little mind, her eyes like shot open, you know. So it seems that kind of thing can easily cause the mind to leave immediately. When the geshe came, and Stephen Butler was there, and I was just texting, and I said, has the mind left? And Geshe said, yes, it seems like it. So when you have a violent death, the mind can leave immediately, because it can be quite shocking for the person, you know. So you leave the body for 3 days. So this is the thing in the chapters now, if your loved one dies at home, Rinpoche gives all these different practices you could choose to do, you know. then the next scenario would be, and then you've got at least the choice of those 3 days if you can. But the next scenario is if you die in hospital or in an institution. There you don't have the luxury, unless you're rich, you don't have the luxury of having a place for 3 days, you know. But what's really important there, it's going to get cold now, isn't it? Look, the sun's gone. What's important there is to have your wits about you. You've got to know in advance what you want. You've got to let them know. And I found when you talk to hospitals, they're very kind and really be to do what you can. They'll do what they can to help, you know. So you let them know in advance that you don't want them to touch the body. If your mummy dies in the middle of the night, you're not there, don't touch the body. Call me immediately and I'll come. And then you take as long as you can. Or if you're with your mummy in the middle of the night, don't just leap up and call the doctor. Just take as long as you can before you disturb the body. Even a half an hour, Rinpoche says. But take as long as you can. I mean, I was in Adelaide recently and a friend of a Vietnamese family, the father died. So he had a private room, so they let them stay all night, you know, as long as you can. So you organise this in advance. Lama Yeshe, when he passed away in California, in Los Angeles, you know, Lama Zopa talks about it in his book, said that they were so kind, you know, they tried to keep him alive and they finally didn't. He died at dawn on New Year's Day. And so they allowed them to take the body very gently on a stretcher, or gurney as they call it, to another room that was spare for a day. So everybody sat with him all day as Lama did his meditation. And then they took the body and then drove it. It took a very long time to drive it, 300, 400 miles, to Northern California, to our centre, Vajrapani Institute. And then, you're okay? Got your clothes on? We should be like Geshe Kontrok and just have tumo, inner heat they call it. You generate your own inner heat so you can be happy wherever you are. You just adjust your temperature. So he was naked and 6 foot of snow and he was fine. Can you imagine? So anyway, then Lama stayed there for we had all these people came from all over the world when he died, and he was basically in meditation for 5 days, even though he'd been moved and the body had been driven here and there. He was in meditation for 5 days. That's what the yogis can do. They go through this death process with complete control because they've trained all their life in their meditations. They can get their mind from the gross level to the subtle level with control. So they're conscious at these levels as they go, conscious at ever more subtle levels. And then when they get to the subtlest level, the clear light consciousness, the subtlest level of mind, because that's the most powerful level of mind, as Lama Zopa says, death's what they've been waiting for, because this is the most powerful moment of their mind. They've practiced their whole life. So they can stay in their mind. As Lama was meditating for 5 days. Many of them stay for 6, can stay for weeks in their body, meditating at this clear light level. Because it's the most powerful level of mind, it can remove all the obstacles, all the delusions very quickly. That's the point about it. It's a technical thing. It's a practical thing. So your ordinary people, the very best thing is at least die well, at least create the cause to get another decent human rebirth, at least that. And then you leave the body for 3 days if you can. And then before you move the body, there are certain ways of checking whether the consciousness is still there. And that's really important to do. So one of the ways that you can check is, I mentioned the red and the white drop, which is what your consciousness joins with at the time of conception, and that's known as the indestructible drop. And that begins at your heart chakra. So at the time of death, everything subsumes to that, this indestructible drop where your very subtle consciousness is residing. So when that opens, the red drop, I forget which it is, for the male and the female it's different. The red drop, let's say in one case, goes down the central channel and comes out the sex organ. And you can see this little kind of pinkish thing. That's an indication the mind has gone. And the white drop comes up and comes out the nostril. That's one sign that the person's mind has left the body. Another sign is, if as long as the mind is in the body, if you put your hand, the rest of the body can be really cold, but if you put your hand just above their heart chakra, it'll be distinctly warm. Because when the mind is there, the body's warm, That's a good way to check, apparently. For your dog as well. When you know the mind is gone, then you can do what you like with it, feed it to the dogs. Well, they feed it to the birds in Tibet. They have a thing called sky burial. I think they still do it, I'm not sure. So they get the body up on the rocks, and they cut it all up, and all the big eagles or the big vultures are all waiting. Then they're given the right sign, they come down, they eat the lot. It's really efficient. They clean up the whole place, lick up all the blood, it's all gone. Don't need stupid old cemeteries. What a waste of real estate. So, anyway, you know how to do that. I mean, I always say stupid things, I'm sorry. I kind of go off to a ridiculous point. But if you want to feed it to the dogs, you wouldn't be allowed to. You wouldn't be allowed to feed your body to the dogs, would you? You'd probably get arrested. You just have to use up...
Bury bodies in your yard,
And
you can't even bury bodies.
You can't?
No.
That's interesting, isn't it?
You have to be...
Put in a bloody cemetery. So ridiculous. Or burn it.
You can in England.
What?
You
You
get
can?
Special permission.
Oh, you can?
To bury a body in your garden.
Oh, well done. Well, it's interesting with Lama Yeshe, when he passed away, we mentioned this. You can't, I mean, we couldn't have done it now. He was in the hospital. We were allowed to take the body. I mean, they say they paid $2 to the special funeral fellow who did unusual funerals. So he gave us permission. So they were allowed to take the body, and then we had our own thing up in Vajrapani Institute, the fire puja. So anyway, if you love one, so that's the way to do it. 3 days. You check the body, and then once you know the mind's gone, then all is well. You can do what you like with the body. But at this point, there's many practices you can do after the mind. One of the main sections is what to do after the mind has left the body. There's many practices you can still do that help that person while they're in the intermediate state. You know, like a dream state between births. Never longer than 7 weeks. So there's various practices they can do for those 49 days. That's very common. So if your loved one dies in hospital, like I said, you've got half an hour if you're lucky. Best you can. Do what practices you can. And then again, check if the mind has left. Now, if it hasn't, there is this thing you can do. I've never done it, I don't know, that can help the consciousness leave. And so, because when the consciousness does leave the body, first of all, there's ways that when the mind, what am I saying here? Yeah, when the consciousness does leave, it leaves from different places in the body, and they can also be indications of the type of rebirth. So if you're going to be born in the animal realm, it leaves through I forget which is which, the anus, and then the hell realms, it leaves through the sex organ, one or the other. If you're going to be born a human, consciousness leaves through the eyes. If you're going to be born as a spirit, it leaves through the mouth. And I always think of that. Please don't start kissing your loved one when they're dead, because that'll make their consciousness go there and then go out their mouth. That's not cool. That's why you don't touch the body. Even though the gross consciousness has ceased, it can still be very sensitive, very sensitive to being noise and sounds and being touched. You don't touch the body as much as you can. If you're going to be born in a pure land, and I haven't talked about that yet, and I will, it'll leave through your consciousness. It'll leave through, your crown chakra. So what you can do if the mind hasn't left, you tap, the crown chakra is about here. If your spine went all the way up, the central channel is just in front of the spine. So you can kind of, around about here, it's sort of there. This chakra, this constriction of channels. So what you can do, because there's the consciousness at the heart chakra in the central channel. So what you can do is tap really vigorously, or pull the hair really vigorously. Don't be gentle. Really vigorously. Tap very, very strongly. That can encourage the mind to zap up and leave through the crown, which can then mean it can kind of suddenly get a pure land rebirth, which I'll talk about in a minute. You do that. Now the other thing is, I asked Rinpoche about this, and this was a paper pack coming out, so there's extra information in it. And I mentioned the case of Trisha. He told Yeshe Karo to leave the body. I said, well, can't people do that? Could we say, for example, if you've only got a half an hour in the bed and they have to make the bed for someone else, can you ask them to leave it in the morgue in the hospital for 3 days? And then you do your practices and everything, and have the monasteries do practices while in that 3-day period, and then come and get the body after 3 days. He says, yeah, why not? Which is interesting. So you don't have to make the body, if the mind hasn't left. I mean, the body won't mind being in a fridge because there's no senses. So at least you have the 3 days when you can be, the mind might still be in the body for that 3 days, and you can do practices for them. That's a possibility.
Just wonder about moving them if the consciousness would stay.
But that's why he says do it very gently. I mean, one time I know we had a friend of ours in Santa Cruz. I might have mentioned this. In Santa Cruz, our friend Paul was a Buddhist, and his wife was a Buddhist, and so was the daughter. She worked for me for the prison project for a while. So he died, and he had a really bad heart, and he got his wife to promise that if he had a heart attack, not to call the hospital. But she panicked and she called the hospital. So too late, so they took him. So we went in there at dawn in Santa Cruz, and they had him plugged on. He didn't want all that, So we knew what he wanted. So we did all the prayers for him that he wanted. And he knew. You could tell he was distressed. You could tell. He knew. We were there doing it. You could tell, So then they pulled the plug, and they gently put him in a bag, and then they put him in the back of the ambulance, had to take him. So they drove very gently, very kindly to the mortuary, whatever they call the place, the funeral home. So we sat with him all day. Then they had to make us go at 4 o'clock. They stuck him in the fridge. We said, could we stay all night? They said no. But we gave them a CD of the Gyuto monks chanting, and they promised they'd play it in the fridge. So all the other dead bodies got the Gyuto monks chanting as well. So we came back next day, took him out, and did more prayers. So we did the 3 days like that. Who knows? We didn't. I don't think we checked if his mind had left. But there's things you can do, Things you can do, and knowing why you're doing it. So if the mind is gone, no reason to do that. Burn the damn thing. If you know the mind is gone, there's no reason to stick around for 3 days. That's silly. It's only if the mind is still there. So then The next scenario would be the one about organs, and I told you about that. Interesting. That's a very interesting one. The Lama's always praised. Lama Zopa praises hugely. And he even said, once I told him about this experience, he said still he thinks the virtue of the person's motivation will help their mind not be disturbed, you know. But another Lama I spoke to, and of course I couldn't put that in the book because it's not his book. Geshe Loden in France. I think he's a yogi. He's amazing. He said he doesn't agree. He says, of course the karma can change. You might have had a good motivation once. Let's say you were 20 and you decide to give your organs, but here you are 60 and you're an old drunk, you know, running around being berserk and you die. I don't think your motivation when you're 20 is going to play much role. You've forgotten it, you know. So I think it doesn't, but Lama Zopa says he feels still, even though you might be disturbed, like I said about that heartbeat going from 100 to 200 and the person being disturbed, he still feels that the motivation was so pure, you know. But also the point he makes is that even if after the organs have been taken out, he says still it doesn't follow the mind has left the body yet. The mind still could be there. So even after you've given the body and the organs have been taken out, you still, when you get the body back, do this business of this. Check still to see if the mind is there and do this one as well in case to help the mind leave. But that I thought was interesting, you know. So you can't be certain, but it's possible that it mightn't disturb their mind. But that woman, I'd say, my sense is her subtle mind was aware of what was going on. She still knows it's her. She knows it's her body. And they're suddenly going to cut her from head to toe with a circular saw. I mean, of course your heart would go from 100 to 200 beats a minute. You have a complete panic attack. That I thought was such a powerful story, you know. That's amazing. That blew my mind. The other one is, what if your loved one dies suddenly? And that's not an uncommon thing. You drop dead in your soup, you know. Like Paul dropped dead on the ground. Well, not quite dead, he didn't die yet. Or in a car accident. Again, if you're there, you've got to have your wits about you. You just got to not, the first thing we do is panic and call someone else. So you've got to know, I mean, but I think it'd be very hard, wouldn't it? What about you nurses? Is it hard to recognise if a person has a heart attack and they stop breathing? Is it hard to know whether it's worth? Is it hard to know whether it's worth trying to get them back to life, or you know they're not going to come back? Do you know the difference? What's your experience?
We have to ask before.
Now I'm asking you your experience. Is it possible to judge by a person who's on the ground not breathing? Is it possible to judge, no, there's no point in bringing them back, or is it worth it?
No, you always try to bring them back.
No, I'm not asking you that. I'm not asking you what the law says. I'm asking you if you personally can get know the person's dead. Or I'm not asking what the law says you should do. Can you tell if there's no point in doing resuscitation? They're dead, I'm certain. Can you tell that? Your own personal experience is what I'm asking. That's what I'm asking.
But not if they just dropped in front of you. But if they're laying in a bed and they've gone through processes already, it's very easy to tell.
I'm not asking that. I'm not asking that. I'm not asking that. Are you seeing what I'm saying?
Yeah, I see. I've never
Can you tell?
Yeah.
What?
I've not thought of it before because you know you're trained to just go.
I know, but you've never thought to see whether you can tell or not?
No.
Okay.
I was going to.
What?
When they're actively dying, you know, you can tell their body's shutting down. You know, it's not worth it to bring it back. But that's a slower.
That's a different discussion. That's not the discussion. Okay, that's interesting. So all I'm saying is, if a person does die suddenly, you've got to have your wits about you to know what's the wisest thing to do, is all I'm getting at. And again, because we know death is natural, and you can't always make it all perfect, you can't always make it all happy, you've got to accept reality. But as long as you keep your wits about you, then the first thing, no matter what you can do with their body, at least you can say prayers in their ear. That's the Buddhist view. At least you can do, if you're in a car accident and a person's dying, you can't make them better, they're going to die. So at least you do things to help their mind. That's the point. Instead of panicking, is what I'm getting at. And if they come back to life, great. If they don't, then at least you've helped their mind while they're there sitting distressed with, especially with a car accident. Do you understand my point, people? You have to have your wits about you. As Lama Zopa says, this is education we all need, to help their mind. Their body's one thing, the mind is what we're talking here. And even you can imagine, you're in a car accident and there's a kind person holding your hand and saying soothing things in your ear. That could be the most precious gift you could have, because you're feeling so panicked, so alone, so freaked out, and one kind person. I think about that in old people's homes. The cleaning lady could be the one person who adores you and who makes you feel good, just by kindness. This is the precious gift, just being kind to the person. Because when you're old and sick and you have never thought about death, your mind is beyond distressed. You've never worked on your mind in your life. And now you really don't know what to do, and you know it's coming, and you have no one to turn to. So to have one kind person is the most precious gift. You don't have to do any more than that. We're not God, we can't make it all perfect. And there's no point in panicking. I have very few experience with dying people. 2 or 3 times I've had. I remember one time in California, I'd visited on the same day 2 different people. And one was this old Zen couple, they were like 97. And the husband was blind and she was deaf. I forget what it was, but they were the most blissful couple. Just gorgeous people in this old funny house. And she was on the bed hardly moving, she's dying. And the old husband, he was blind or deaf, I can't remember which, would take care of her. But they were just these blissful people. She was just happy, you know, you could tell she was dying peacefully. She was cool. And another woman, living on her own, had cancer, was so distressed. She was just beyond distressed, you know, beyond distressed, freaking out, completely anxious. And what happens is, you know, I see this in old people's homes, we just think, well, you've got to distract them. So they put the television on. And so, or she have television all day. And the point about attachment, which is growing so much more strongly as you're dying, especially when you have so much fear, is because of attachment, which means clinging, afraid to let go of this. Then attachment wants anything to hold on to. So you give attachment anything and we'll glom onto it like a little kind of leech. So when you have the television there, of course the attachment just will sink into that and cling to it. The attachment needs an object. Do you understand what I'm saying? So this is why if there's no many berserk sensory objects like pets and crazy people and television, the mind can become more peaceful. Your attachment won't have anything to grab onto, so your mind becomes peaceful. So she had the television all the time and she had these people coming and going, rostering to help her, you know. And I sat there for half an hour. I'd never done that before. And I thought, what will I do? I thought I'll just sing a mantra. What else could I do? Just sing a mantra quietly, you know. Immediately, you can see the benefit. Immediately her mind became peaceful. And if you've got attachment, your attachment goes on to that. And because it's a peaceful object, it can help you. Do you understand? When we understand the energy of attachment, which is quite unique in the Buddhist understanding, then you know exactly how to help a person, you know. The least distraction and ridiculous things possible around, and anything that is there, their attachment will still go to it, but it's beneficial for them. Do you understand? So anyway, the interesting point was she liked Lama Yeshe. So it was in the days of not DVDs, the other one, the thick one. What's it called? What was it called?
VHS.
Huh?
VHS.
Yeah, that's right. What's the other word for it?
Videotape.
A videotape, thank you. We had a videotape of Lama Yeshe. So I gave them the videotape, and so the television normally was just the television. So they put the videotape in, but the television broke. So she couldn't have the television. Well, she died in like an hour. Because the attachment had nowhere to go. So it just became peaceful. So let's hope there was some benefit from the mantras, that's all. So when you understand attachment, it's not love. Attachment to animals is just pure, there can be affection there, but it's just unbelievable attachment. It's about the worst thing for a person, you know. So keep all the ridiculous things away, because their attachment has nowhere to go then. Only have peaceful things, virtuous things, sweet things, things that help their mind be virtuous and peaceful. When we understand this, we will know how to help. And the mouse and the dog the same. The next scenario is if your loved one's a yogi and they know how they're meditating at the time of death. Well, you just walk out, close the door and leave them in peace. They know what they're doing. Just leave them alone. They know what they're doing. But you know, it'd be unusual to have an auntie who's a meditator, but you never know. Okay, so any questions about all that?
What about people around the person that's dying being very distressed?
That's what I'm saying. Keep all those people out.
That should
Absolutely. If you've got the control, people leave their emotions at the door, please. The people who are around them have to know what's going on, have to be peaceful, kind, sweet. People, if there's somebody the person can't stand, get them out of the room. If a person they're very attached to and the attached person doesn't know how to be wise, that's the worst thing possible as well. I mean, you hear these nightmares of scenarios of people dying, like one family on all sides of the bed screaming at the father about the will. I mean, you can't imagine the pain for the poor father, you know. I mean, the nightmares around dying people. Everybody in the room, the things in the room, it should be there for the benefit of that person, to help them be peaceful and virtuous. That's it. Do you understand? Yeah.
Thank you. You have a beloved pet you've had for years. Pet is obviously suffering, has cancer, has liver disease, has
That's right.
disease,
Just like your grandmother.
and
Then, question?
euthanasia.
But you must know what we're saying. You must know the answer, Chuck.
I do know the
Well, then tell us. What do you think, from the Buddhist view, what do you think is the wise thing to do?
Make the dog peaceful.
That's right.
Make the pet peaceful.
That's right. I mean, it's our own fears half the time. Our attachment only wants nice things. So we think it's called compassion, but half the time is we can't stand the thought of that suffering. And half the time, I'm sorry to be so rude, we put all our investment into animals, they start costing us millions of dollars. Of course you want to have them killed. I mean, that's our own attack. We're very wicked, you know, and we lie to ourselves. So poor vets half the time end up killing animals. It's very wicked, you know, and our own neurosis. It's not kindness. I mean, animals, your pet, especially your dog, adores you. And if you can be around making your pet feel safe, putting it in a quiet place, give it a pill to help its pain, allow it to die peacefully, and it'll be so happy to see you. You'll make it happy. And don't be surprised that gives an imprint of being a human being on its mind. If it's attached to you as a human, Lawudo says the grasping that kicks in at the time of death. In our case, from our past life, we must have had grasping at a human body. So if your animal can die around you, and your dog, who so adores you and so attached to you, that could help trigger a karmic seed for its human birth. That's my suggestion. It's just my thought. So there's no benefit in just killing an animal or killing your grandma. It's playing Russian roulette. If you haven't got the wisdom to see their mind, if you don't have the wisdom to know the karma they have, who do we think we are to go and kill them? It's very rude, you know. Sometimes you've got no choice, maybe. But we've got to understand this point. And of course, this is, again, the Buddhist view. Do you understand?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I've seen with a couple of families that I know this last year, where, like in one case, the father basically dropped dead, but they kept him alive at the hospital so that the family could gather to say goodbye. What do you think?
That's just completely ridiculous. It's self-centered rubbish. That's all about us. And that's just, I mean, it might have been beneficial to him. I don't know. Was he conscious? Was he conscious?
I don't know.
Well, then it depends if he's conscious.
I've heard that in 2 cases spoken of in a very positive way, and it was so great they could keep him alive.
But that's just for us. But that's for us. That's for us. It's so selfish. That's for our benefit. We've got to do what's best for that person. Excuse me. This whole approach in this book is only for the benefit of the person. It's their gig, you know. But we see it all about us. It's outrageous. We're like that. It's so sentimental. It's so attachment. It's all about us. And then we feel good because it looks like Daddy's dying peacefully. We kind of feel, oh, good. You don't have to feel guilty now. I mean, it's so self-centered, in my opinion. It's important to have grief and deal with our suffering, but this whole thing is about the person. And even in this book, half the information is about what you do after they die. Even then, there's so much we can do to help them. So it's not about. It looks nice, all lovey-dovey at the end of death. And I mean, it could be because if it helps the person who's dying get rid of their grief and their jealousy and their anger and their hurt, and people all love them and say it's fine, then it's for their benefit. That's great. Do you understand my point? It's got to be for their benefit. Everything has to be for their benefit. Get the point? What else, people? Yeah.
When you're with a person who's dying who has no background in Buddhist
Yes.
philosophy or anything,
Yes.
do you still say Sanskrit mantra?
I think it's up to you to decide what's why. You use your wisdom, you know. I mean, if they're a Christian, you do what's good for their mind. I mean, one of the sections of what to do to help before they die is what to talk about. So one of the things you can talk about is if your mummy's, let's say, a Catholic, but she's not going to Mass lately, you don't shove God down her throat, but you start talking, well, Mummy, you know, I've been thinking about God lately, and God really loves all of us, and He does love you. And you know, heaven, I've heard about heaven lately, it sounds really great. You can help her trigger those thoughts in her mind and make her start thinking about heaven and God. That'll help her be peaceful. You do what's wise for that person. Or you can talk about their good qualities. That we never do anyway. So just start loving your mother, praising her, thanking her for being a good mother. What a good life you've had. That is like nectar on her heart, you know. You don't, I mean, if you got to be wise. So the thing is, there's nothing. People often feel like you're sort of shoving Buddhism down their throat if you say a mantra. But a mantra is just a very peaceful, sweet sound. It's not. You know, don't think of it as religion. So it's up to you to use your wisdom to know what's beneficial. Do you understand?
But you don't then try to talk about reincarnation.
Well, I mean, you do what's wise. You've got to know, as Lama Zopa says, you've got to know the person's mind. You've got to have wisdom to know what's right for them. So even if they're a Buddhist, it depends on what you talk about. Do you understand my point? You've got to know their mind and what's useful for them. So talk about friendly things. The point is, whatever you do is to help their mind be peaceful and virtuous. That's the bottom line. So you've got to have some wisdom to know where they're at, to know what's right for them. It might just to talk about kindness. It might be to talk about anything. You just got to know what's right for them. Do you understand my point? And that's up to you. There's no set thing, you know. Do you understand? Yeah. But I think praising a person, you know, like say your grandma's a communist. You don't talk about Buddha or anything ridiculous, you know, but you talk about her good qualities, praise their kindness. But even still, some people are very suffering, for example. Lama Zopa says a really brave person, you can do a practice called Tong Len, which is about taking on themselves using their suffering for the sake of others. But if you've got a very selfish person dying, that's about the worst thing to tell them, to use their suffering for the sake of others. They get upset. So you've got to know the person's mind. You've got to know the person's mind. Just them up, that's the point. Then you'll know how to help their mind be peaceful. Tell them you love them. Tell them what a good person they are. Praise them all the time. Whatever, something to help them calm. And then still, it doesn't guarantee you will. They still might be miserable. Do you understand my point? Are you sure?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Yeah.
My mother is a Catholic, and she takes communion to people who are sick.
Amazing.
And she takes communion to this lady who's in a care home, and basically I think she's got dementia, the lady. And my mum finds it very distressing when this lady has got this kind of fixation of what a bad person she's been, and all she talks about is how terrible she is, what a bad person she is, all the terrible things she's done.
Exactly.
My mum doesn't
know what to help her.
How to help
Right,
her.
exactly.
Yeah.
That's often the thing, isn't it? And that's it. That's it. And sometimes even if you do say nice things, she's not going to listen because we're so obsessed with our negativity. Right.
Obsessive.
Exactly.
What a bad person she is.
Catholic ladies are allowed to take communion around. Oh, that's changed.
Yes, yeah,
My God.
Yeah.
Wow.
The priest blesses. It's during the communion.
Yes.
The priest blesses the host.
Of course he does.
And they put it into this special little container.
Yes.
So people take them.
That's amazing. How kind. Wow.
Yeah, it's lovely.
Amazing. That's amazing. Yes.
Will we be able to do a meditation practice at the death process at some point?
I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, we could.
Well, you kind of did it last
Please?
night.
We did a bit, yeah. Why don't you lead it? You can read the book and you can lead it. Or, sure, no, you don't like doing those things, do you? You don't like doing those things, do you? Leading them. No, that's right. I mean, let's see about it. Let's see. No, let's see. I understand, darling. Let's see. Let's find. Let's see. Okay. What else? Other questions? Yes, darling.
I actually have it written in my cremation papers that they can't touch my body for 72 hours.
Uh-huh.
And they seem fine with it.
Who's they?
The crematorium, the service that
I'm a bit confused.
you go
But how do you?
to
What?
a
But what
place-
good is that if you drop dead in Nepal, though? You're assuming you're going to die at home in peace.
Yeah.
You might. You might
At
not.
least that part of it's taken care
It's true. So you should do those
No,
things.
I mean, at least I planned ahead and my family all knows my wishes.
Well, that's helpful. If you're around when you die, that's right. That is necessary. Now that's a good thing. That they call that a living will. Yeah, that's a help. That's a very sensible thing to do.
In print with the crematorium that when they pick me up, they're not touching me for 72 hours.
Okay, whatever. Good. Okay, it's good to tell.
Anyway,
It's good to tell people that. No, it's good to people. You should know.
not impossible.
That's right. You should
I
know
might
what
be
you.
cold, but
Yeah.
at least they won't be touching me.
So what time is it? Tea time already? No time. Not tea time yet.
7 minutes.
What is it? Do they know we're going to have tea at 9:30? Do you have tea always? Is tea there? Is there? There is tea in the tent, is there?
Not always.
There isn't.
There's normally tea in the tent, yes.
So you say sometimes there isn't.
Oh, I didn't. I thought sometimes there were. I thought they put it.
There's always tea in the tent. There's always tea in the tent. I'm asking a question.
No, sometimes there's not.
There's not tea in the tent.
Sometimes there is, sometimes there's not.
There's hot water in the tent. So we're having a break at 9:30. So would you please go and ask the kitchen to have tea at 9:30? Thank you very much. In the tent. Thank you very much. Are there any other questions about death? Yes, sweetheart.
I was just wondering with children if it would be appropriate, maybe it's not exactly like a death meditation, but could you sing the chuk practice?
No, it's not appropriate. I don't think so, is it? Or is it?
Have the empowerment.
Pardon?
He's supposed to have the empowerment.
I know, it's not appropriate, darling.
Yeah.
So, it's not appropriate. So any other questions about death? Yes.
What's a fire puja?
Fire puja. There's different kinds. But for example, Lama Yeshi, when he passed away, what we did was they got his body. He was meditating for 5 days. He was in the coffin, and lots of people all over the world came. We did lots of practice and prayers over 5 days. The lamas were there, and then we prepared this. Like a for the cremation, it was like a square structure. Song Rinpoche, one old lama, he knows all the architecture of it. He knows how to. So they built this square you know, about that high, a big square thing, like, you know, bricks in the middle. So then, and there's 4 holes, 4 sides, and then you've got Lama all dressed in special kind of things, self-initiation clothing, and in a chair, tied up in the chair. And his body was still flexible, even after 5 days, because his mind only left then. They could tell. So then they put him in the middle there, they put all the wood in it and put stuff ready to burn, then they built up a cone-shaped top part with a hole in the top and a couple of holes around it and whitewashed it. And then this fire puja, this is in particular one was Yamantaka, I think. It takes several hours. And it's just an elaborate ritual, whatever words you like, lots of prayers and singing, and offering different substances into the fire. Many, hundreds of different things, like all kinds of grains, and each represents certain things. Purification. It's very elaborate, kind of symbolic type things, you know. And then someone starts the fire, and it has to be a person who isn't their student. So that in this case with Lama, they asked a girl who didn't know Lama to set fire to the body. It would be inappropriate to burn your own guru's body, you know. So then we'd all sat around, did these prayers for 3 or 4 hours while different people put the things into the fire and then burned up his body, and then for 3 or 4 hours I think it took. Then they close up the holes and leave it for 3 days. Then they open it up, and Lamas open it up there, and they take out all the remains. And often with these holy beings, they leave relics. They call it relics, you know, and like little pearl type things. And there were quite a few of these. And they took all the bones, and then they were blessed and distributed around the world to all the different students. But a fire puja is related to different Buddhas, and it's all these different grains and things you use. It's a purification process. So when you've done a retreat, a tantric retreat, you finish the retreat by sealing it, if you like, with regular fire puja to purify all the mistakes and all the obstacles. It's just this very elaborate thing of prayers and blah 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 blah, you know, blah 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 blah, isn't it?
Yeah, and there's usually a deity in the fire pit.
Oh yeah, and the whole visualization of the Buddha in the fire, but you're offering all these things to that. There's a very nice little one that people like to do. It's very short. We could have done that if you liked. We could do the Doji Kadro fire puja. People love that. Maybe we could do that. You get very excited. People love it. You get these black sesame seeds, and we have this little thing in the middle, and we imagine the Buddha there, and you're throwing these black sesame seeds of all your yucky stuff, all your delusions, all your rubbish, chucking them into the fire. People really like it. Maybe we could do one. Let's see. Let's ask if they've got sesame seeds. Probably not. They probably haven't got sesame seeds.
I would think not.
I would think not. Black ones. It's going to be black ones. People love doing that. It takes about an hour. You sing this mantra and you chuck in these black seeds. You're giving all your rubbish, all the purification. Lama Yeshe could tell all the hippies loved it, so you got us to do it, you know. That's right. It was very funny because there's this pill also called chulen. I told you about the pill. The Tibetan doctors make, and then lamas, yogis, live on them for their retreats. And they live for years on these little pills that take the essence from all the minerals and things. And you get very skinny because you don't need food. And so Lama thought it was he thought it'd be great for Western, so he tried to commercialise it and sell them for $1 each. But he never got, I don't think he'd had enough marketing, so he didn't sell them. He thought all these Westerns want to go on a diet, you know. They'd love their chulen pills. Yes.
Question. What's the effect of oftentimes when somebody is dying of cancer or whatever, they administer morphine, and which can really, you know.
No, that's a really good point, Chuck. Yeah.
And what effect is
Good. Let me talk about that. Thank you for asking. It's a very good point. I think, again, that just really does indicate perhaps the lack of understanding of the mind in our medical profession, may I suggest. So the key thing is when you're dying is to have as much mental awareness as possible. Even Lama Yeshe was a great yogi, a high tantric yogi. When he got very sick in Delhi, they gave him all these drugs. And I remember he wrote a letter to one of his friends, and he said it was so distressing, really hard to have control of your mind. So when you're not a yogi, just forget about it. You know, so then, because we think, this is one thing too, you know, we think, I'll give them all the drugs and they look peaceful. They look peaceful, we say. But you know perfectly well, you could be lying there in bed peaceful and you're next to your husband and you wake up in the morning and you describe you had this nightmare all night. But you weren't moving because the mind is still vividly aware. And just because you look like you, and especially if you're out on drugs, your mind's hallucinating. Your mind is not clear. I mean, it's the worst thing you can do for a person. And I mean, you know, so, and then because it dulls your it dulls your awareness. So you've got to have a fine balance between stopping the pain but keeping the person to be conscious. Because really the most distressing way to die was your mind out of you know. I remember one time one woman in a hospital, Jackie Keeley and I in Florida went to visit. She'd run Lama's Opus Centre there, and she has terrible cancer, a lot of suffering. And she was in the hospital, really distressed. You could tell she was so distressed, you know. And her family were there, very Christian. And even though they knew she was Buddhist, they didn't want us to be around. They just gave us 5 minutes. And we were trying to play prayers into her ear of Lama Zopa. She was very devoted. But they thought we were disturbing her peace, they said. But you could tell she wasn't peaceful. She was really distressed, out of brain on drugs, you know. I remember one time another person in Bendigo I went to visit. And his wife, he was dying, he was Buddhist, on a lot of morphine, out of his brain, you know. And his wife was there and she allowed us to do prayers and things. I mean, you could tell because he was sort of unconscious or out of his drugs, out of his brain on drugs. I remember I doing the prayers for him, you had to really shout them. And I knew you could hear me and I was screaming at him because you could feel him kind of coming out of his torpor to let me know that he was there, you know. So I said his prayers really loudly so he could hear them. I had to get past the fog of the drugs, you know. And this is what he wanted. I remember I held his hand and he squashed my hand. He felt my hand, you know. So it's not cool to have heavy duty drugs, but what can you do? Yeah.
I'd say I know a few healthcare nurses and professionals.
Yeah.
And, I'm pretty sure that they're very aware of
Yes.
how much narcotic they can give.
That's interesting.
Reduce the pain. But
Yeah. And now I've heard that these days there is more of this awareness to keep a balance between. That's important, isn't it? That is important. And no, I've heard that too. That's really good. Yeah. So once you've stopped breathing, then there's 3 days. This is the Buddhist view. This is a Tibetan Buddhist. It's not Zen. This is different. All different. This is the Vajrayana view, which is only really in Tibet. You know, coming from India. So then you got once the mind is gone, then you do. Then there's a way to. There's certain things you can do to really help the mind. And this Rinpoche is really a fan of these certain practices. And that's once you had the funeral. You can have and they don't talk about a funeral, but you can, you make up your own funeral, have a nice memorial, have nice prayers done, make offerings, blah, 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 But also you can do lots of other practices like making sure, for example, one of the things you can do is making sure they've given all their possessions away. We write wills, I know that, but it's really important to give all their things away, every tiny possession, because that's very powerful for their mind to help them create generosity. You can use their money to do special things, use their money to say, give to non-profits or give to monasteries or give to centres. That's so beneficial for the person's mind, for their karma, things like that. Then you can also, then the thing with the body itself, once you've had the cremation, you keep some of the ashes, doesn't have to be all of them, but you keep some of the ashes, and then there's a particular prayer, ritual, related to the Buddha that Rinpoche says is so powerful. It's called Jangwa. And usually it's important, it's quite long and complicated, so it's really important to get a lama or monasteries who know what they're doing. So you give them the ashes and the ashes get blessed. And they say this is really incredibly powerful for a person who's died. They can even help them reverse their karma if they were going to get a lower realm rebirth. Can really help them reverse it. Rinpoche is such a fan of that practice. And even if now you could do that.
And so every November they do it L&B.
Oh, they do? Jangwa?
Yeah, I guess that's what
okay.
So anyone could send
their ashes, even if you've got any remains of your own, even if you've got a bit of hair from the hairbrush of your mother, you could give it and have it blessed. And then what you do with the ashes, as Rinpoche says, it's no benefit to anybody, the dying or you, if you just go to you have the ashes and you hold them on, you stick them on your mantelpiece, or you have them in the ground where you bury the body. There's no benefit. And even going to the funeral place, what do you call, the cemetery, no benefit. But if you've blessed their ashes or blessed their bones or even a bit of their hair, then it becomes like a holy object. And then what you can also do is use those ashes and mix it with plaster to make one of those little Buddhist images called a tsatsa or a stupa, something like that. Then it's really beneficial. And I remember a friend in Perth whose young son, 40-year-old son, died, and the young wife and the children were beyond devastated and had the ashes sitting on the mantelpiece but didn't want to let go of them, didn't know what to do with them, They're just painful. So then she thought it was a great idea to have them blessed and then turn into little images of the Buddha. And then when you look at that little image, there's your own husband. At least, there's something meaningful about it, rather than just seeing the ashes. It seems so sinister, But it's really beneficial for both the people, but for the person who died. That's called Jangwa. There's other practice you can do after they've died. And then lots of things you can do for the next 49 days to help them, have prayers and pujas done for their benefit. There's about 87 different practices in the book. It's like 2/3 of the book is the practices. Different sutras you can do, different mantras you can do, lots of different things. And of course you can select from this. And as Rinpoche says, you might just choose to do the Medicine Buddha mantra and that's it. That's fine. You select from it. It's his book. He's allowed to have as many practices as he likes. But you can choose which ones you can do at these different stages. And the whole book is written kind of chronological, what to do when, Because it's very overwhelming normally. We get this, and Rinpoche always tells so many things, you get confused. And this book began because in France, and he gave these teachings based on some teachings he gave 10 years ago, more than that. Our friend, one of my friends' father, she went to Rinpoche and said, my father died suddenly and I didn't know what to do. Now, Rinpoche was shocked because he'd been a Buddhist for years and he's always given us these teachings. Because he gives so many teachings, you never know what to do when, you know. So then he changed the topic of the retreat and he taught much of the stuff that's in this book, you know. And of course, because we're so attached to the person who dies and we don't know what to do, and we freak out, but it's so important to know what to do. And remember, the point of it is for the person's sake. It's for their sake, to help them die peacefully and virtuously so their mind continues on another decent rebirth. That's the bottom line. Yeah.
Does Lama Zopa Rinpoche have a plan for his death?
Oh, I'm quite sure he has. Meditate, and so he can, continue doing his job. I think it's our job to work out what to do, but I don't want to think it because I don't want to think about it, do we? I'm sure he knows what he's doing. Of course he knows, yeah.
I remember years after my mother died, speaking with Geshe Dakpa about, how she doing it.
How what?
How is she? Is she okay?
Oh, you asked him? You asked about your mum?
Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
And what did he say?
Well, then he just told me that I should continue, and I was saying, what could I continue to do for her? And he said, just dedicate, remember her in all my dedications. So
that's it.
Something that everyone can do. If your loved one has, your parents, your partners, whatever, siblings have died, you still want to make prayers for them. You can dedicate whatever virtue you like getting here, from this retreat.
It's true, isn't it? And as Lama Zopa says, even if they're in the lower realms, you can still do something to help them. He's very optimistic,
Years later,
yes, that's right. So the other thing is that Rinpoche mentions all through this book is that, basically of all the different types of rebirth, you don't want to be born in the God realms. It's very blissful, but you're still in samsara. You're so blissed out, and it all runs out, and you're back down in the lower realms. It's a waste of time. You don't want to be born as like a great yogi in the formless realm where you're in this subtle state of bliss. That wastes, again, it ends up, you haven't realised emptiness yet. It's useless. You don't want to be born in the animal realms because you're too stupid and too much suffering. You don't want to get born in the spirits because you're lost and forget the hell realms. So the only option is the human one. But there's one other option. Amitabha's Pure Land. Now, all I know is I'd hear about these Chinese people and their Amitabha Pure Land, and I think, oh, so cynical, I don't go to boring on Amitabha's Pure Land, so it's like ridiculous heaven, Wasn't interested. It was stupid. But when I was doing this book, Holly, the Australian nun who's one of Rinpoche's attendants, actually several of his attendants are Australian. I remember when the 70s and the 80s, all these Italians, they were so jealous, they'd call it about the Australian mafia. They were jealous of the Australians, so they were all hanging around the lamas. For some reason, lamas open, she always had a tendency to be Australian, Anyway, whatever. Holly's Australian. And I was nearly finished the book, but I knew it wasn't finished. I didn't know what was missing. So I was editing it, putting it together. So then she sent me this rough transcript from a teaching Rinpoche gave. The first things he did after his stroke, I think. He had a stroke in 2011. And he started teaching again. Anyway, he gave this initiation to Amitabha, one of these Buddhas. It's the Buddha, the manifestation of purified attachment energy. So he talked about the Pure Land. So let me explain now what this means, okay? So here we're talking about a Buddha. Not physical mind, beginningless, endless. When it's totally purified, it's just in pure, subtle state of, bliss. As much as we can imagine that. Mind is beginningless and endless. And when it's a pure, enlightened mind, there it is, just like that. But out of compassion, Buddha mind, Buddhas, beings that become Buddha, manifest in bodies to help us. So there's two levels of bodies. I mentioned this. One body is the one we can see. So the person called Buddha back then. People now in human form can be Buddhas. They choose to be born as a human to help others. That's the thing. But they also manifest in these subtler bodies, subtle light bodies, that our subtle mind can cognize. The subtle mind, which is the dream mind, when you're really purified, when you're a practitioner, you can have clairvoyance. This mind is that level of cognition, because it doesn't depend upon the brain and the body, is infinitely more powerful in its capacity for cognition. It can see the past, the future, the minds of others. We can develop that capacity. Everybody's got that capacity. So at this level, these Buddhas then manifest in this subtle light body. And that's what's depicted in all those pictures and all the different Buddhas that I mentioned yesterday, that are just manifestations of different psychological qualities. So because the Buddhas manifest in a subtle body, then when we have bodies, we have an environment. We don't just float in the air. Everybody has an environment. We have an environment. So when you're an animal, you have a certain kind of environment. You're a fish, you have a kind of environment. You're a worm, you have an environment. Humans have an environment. That's part of the way karma ripens. is the way the environment manifests for us. So a subtle body, these Buddhas manifest, the meditators can cognize the Buddha at that level in their subtle mind. So that mind then, the Buddha mind, also lives in an environment which is blissful and pure and clear, because everything is created by karma. Everything is created by our mind. So these Buddhas have they call it pure land. It's an environment in which they live. And every Buddha has their own environment. So these pure lands, because they're Buddhas, you've got to have realizations to be reborn, to have a level of capacity to cognize that level, and to be able to utilize the teachings of that level. You've got to be a highly realized being, mostly realizing emptiness. But they say there's Amitabha's pure land, this capacity to cognize Amitabha and the environment in which Amitabha lives at this subtle level is accessible to anybody, even ordinary people. That's the point they say. So I remember in this book, so that chapter's in there, how to pray, to want to be reborn in Amitabha's pure land. The advantage of that is because you don't have a body of a bag of bones, you have a subtle light body, you can get realizations more quickly, you get teachings and become a Buddha much more quickly. And then you can manifest again in humans to be a benefit to others. So all I can know is since that I've become a fan of Amitabha's Pure Land. And I've decided I'm going to be born in Amitabha's Pure Land. What can I say? Then I figure I miss that, I'll get born a human. If I miss that, I'm in trouble. What can I say? So Amitabha's Pure Land.
And so there's that prayer, Lama.
There's a prayer. There's a long, and that's the last thing when I lie asleep at night. I have my iPod. When I'm on an aeroplane, I have my Bose sound-cancelling earphones and my iPod with all my different prayers and practices on it. So I recite things to myself. And then when I go to put my head on the pillow, I turn on my iPad, and there's this little 10 minutes, this little kind of aspiration to be born there. So I say that to myself.
Robina, is that the King of Prayers?
No, another one.
No.
That's good too. That's another one.
Yeah.
Guaranteed. I'm so religious, aren't I? I was always religious. I always loved God. I loved Our Lady, the saints. I was in love with them all. I'd go to Mass 7 mornings a week. I'd do confession. I'd do communion. I'd do the works. But I was the naughtiest girl in the school. It's so strange, isn't it? And I was so sad the nuns never saw my little holy heart. I mean, I was the naughtiest girl. I'm the naughtiest. I was always in trouble. And we had in Catholic convent, I know other Catholics the same, we had our religious, it was a French order of nuns, Sacré-Cœur, Sacred Heart. And we had all these different little congregations, we'd call them. So when each stage of your different stage of as you grow up in the classes, and the highest one was the congregation of Our Lady of something or other. And they were so special to be asked. You had to be invited into those. I never got invited. I was broken-hearted because I was so holy. I went to Mass 7 mornings a week. I went to confession. I knew the Mass in Latin. Couldn't they see I was holy? I was so amazed, but I was naughty, I'll never forget, I was so sad. I tried so hard, and I was in love with Saint Therese of Lisieux. She was 14 when she became a Carmelite nun. She was my great hero. And I was on my knees begging my mother to let me be a nun like Saint Therese, And then the irony is, I can never work it out. At some point, I was so naughty, I stole my mother's high heels. I was like 13, same time wanted to be a nun. I was schizophrenic, I don't know what happened. And I was walking down Murrumbeena Road in high heels and these pink fluorescent earrings I stole from Woolies and pink lipstick trying to seduce Tony Kintotta, the greengrocer's son, And he was like 16 or something. I remember, and I was on these high heels, it was the time of Elvis, I had this full skirt, my lippy, my long hair, trying to be like to seduce this boy, I was just absurd. Maybe I was 12, I don't remember. At the same time, I wanted to be a nun. I can't work it out. And then my mother found out. And I must have been, I'm only 5 feet now, and she's only 5'2", but I remember looking up at her, and she's telling me off. And she said, "You have the audacity." I'd never heard that word before. And I used to read books, I kept thinking, audacity, O-R-D, how do you spell audacity, So she sent me to boarding school. And then I went to Mass 7 mornings a week. And I tried to suffer for God like Saint Therese. I'd be kneeling on my bed doing my prayers at night. And there was no heaters, of course, in my little alcove, we'd call it, with a curtain in front. First time I had my own bed, I was in heaven. And I was kneeling on the floor saying my prayers, and I had a hairbrush. And I tried to press the hairbrush against my forehead to suffer for God. I wasn't very brave, though. Or I'd have one blanket in the winter. It didn't last long, I promise. I wasn't very brave about suffering for God. Oh, I go to Mass every morning. I was so holy, I can't tell you. And I was naughty at the same time. It's still the same now, isn't it? I mean, Lamia, she said at one point to me, "Nothing wrong with your heart, dear. It's just your behaviour." So I'm still trying to behave nicely. Difficult. Anyway, so I knew as a Catholic, I was in love with God. I told you I loved the thought that God was everywhere, but I never thought of God as my creator. I never thought of that. I never had guilt. I thought it was stupid to have guilt. So I must have been a Buddhist from day one. You understand? It was the Dharmakaya, you know. As soon as I went to Mass, I knew it was my job. I announced I'm going to be a priest. I was so happy I found my job. I was 3 or something. So it shows. It took me a while to meet them. You know, my school uniform, we had a yellow blouse and a maroon twin set. Yes, wow. A yellow blouse and a maroon twin set. So I've been a Tibetan Buddhist since I'm born, you know. It's very funny. And then when I tried to get happy, you know. I tried to have sex and get happy. It was such hard work. It was such torture. It was like living in fire. The intensity of the relationships, the anger, the fears, the jealousy, the attachment. I thought, how could people live like this? It was so intense. I could not bear it. It was like living in hell. I'd run away as quick as possible. I'd try again and I'd try again. It was like a nightmare. I know I'm a bit extreme, but I'm just telling you. And then people say they want to get married and have babies. I wouldn't say anything, but I thought, how could you live in one house, in one bed, with the same person every day? I thought they were insane. I couldn't say it, of course. They thought I was insane. My poor family felt sorry for me. We're all got different minds, haven't we? And then I remember at some point, when I was politically active, I remember so vividly, these words came out of my mouth. I was so shocked. I don't know where they came from, this thought. And it sounds so holy. I said to myself, I don't want to give myself to one person. I want to give myself to everybody. I didn't mean sexually. So then I stopped having sex. It was like a miracle. I thought, now, thank God, you know, finished. Then I quit cigarettes. That was the last one to go. My 18 Marlboros. Quit cigarettes, quit drugs, quit alcohol. And then I met the Lamas. I thought, oh, there it is. I was 31 or something. Thank God, now I finally found it, you know. Whew, what a relief. Yeah, excuse me, talking. Time for tea. Yes, it is 9:27. So please have tea. We're on retreat mode again. Silence. And we'll see you in a half an hour.